Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 2, chapter 3, but week 2 of Information System Security. Today we're going to talk about some of the compliance laws. We'll drill down into how those laws end up driving policy, procedures, operations within your organization. And then we'll take a look at some common security threats and ways to mitigate them. So let's go ahead and get started. So some of our learning objectives are to understand the relationship between regulatory compliance. We have things like HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley or PCI compliance. And so all those things drive different requirements technically that we have to implement. We're going to look at cyber terrorism and nation state threats. We're also going to take a look at US compliance laws and how to align security policies with regulations. We'll talk about industry self-regulation through leading practices, who's protected by regulations, and some of the benefits of using an established framework. And last week we talked about the fact that framework is kind of provides structure or is guiding principles. A lot of times a security framework might be something as simple as a Word document that walks you through the process of creating your policies and procedures. So what is cyber terrorism? It is any attempt to cause fear or major disruptions in society through computer hacking. So attacks on government computers, major companies, airports, power grids, those types of things. Nation states or sovereign countries, attacks can come from terrorist group, individuals, or the nations themselves. Cyber terrorism is often sponsored by nation states. And so they'll provide the money and the terrorists and hackers will come out of the woodwork. So as we take a look at why do government need to be involved, why do we need the regulations? The three main drivers are to protect consumers, that's a good thing. To make sure we have a stable economy. If we had problems, the stock market would be up and down, up and down, up and down, all over the board. That wouldn't be a good thing. Make sure that we can tax things that happen online. So kind of those three factors, they're all linked together and they're concerned with the economic and pretty much social benefits that we gain from them. So how does the security policy have competing goals? Well, we're trying to maximize shareholder value, but we have to comply while doing that with some of these security policies. And frankly, they're expensive, they're time consuming, they take people, they take resources. And so as a company, we're trying to reduce our vulnerability. We're trying to reduce the number of threats that we have to be concerned with, but we're getting new things we have to be concerned with that are coming into our organization via the regulations. And so it causes us to have a series of competing goals. If we're maximizing shareholder value, we wouldn't be spending as much money being compliant in different regulations, but we have to be compliant or they'll shut us down. That doesn't maximize shareholder value. So there's a lot of things pushing and pulling. Some of the key concepts affecting policies are we have consumer rights as well as privacy issues. And privacy with GDRC just kind of rewrote how we're doing privacy and cookies and processing and what information we're collecting from users, which caused all businesses to actually stop and have to get compliant. And so within that, we've got data privacy, we've got disclosure, we've got informed consent, all these things that we tell users that they never read, but are there for their benefit. So some examples of regulations, we've got HIPAA for our healthcare data. We've got FISMA, which is the Federal Information Security Management Act. It applies to government organizations and it regulates information security for government agencies. We know that we have things like Sarbanes-Oxley, which deals with public corporations. We have the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which is for banks and consumer protection, consumer data. If you're in school, you're protected by FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. We have the Children's Internet Protection Act, which says we can't collect information from kids under 13. And then we've got other things like we want to be PCI compliant for credit card data. So there's a lot of different regulations coming in that cause us to have to put structures in place. For the most part, having implemented a lot of these, you end up in a more secure place. That's a good thing. You end up with more secure policies. That's a good thing. Your processes become cleaner. That's a good thing. But implementing them is expensive and takes time and causes you to have to take your eye off the ball to other opportunities. So who do regulations protect? We said they protect individuals. We have consumer rights. They protect shareholders because we know the company's transparent, has financial controls in place. They're not cooking the books. We're not going to have an Enron or WorldCom. Hopefully, the public interest is protected, and even the nation's protected if we have cybersecurity controls. And so we want to align our security policies with regulations. That's part of our governance process. But we want to map business processes to our security policies. We want to map security policies, regulations, and then map those security controls to regulations as well. So we kind of look at things from each corner looking in. One time we have our policy hat on, one time we have our procedures hat on, one time we have our compliance officer hat on. Make sure we're getting all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And so there are, fortunately, some good frameworks. It's like everybody's got different security requirements. Everybody's got different security implementations. But at the end of the day, we're worried about hackers. We're worried about intrusion. We're worried about detecting them. We're worried about incidents. All those things have been well defined for companies. And so we can leverage some of the existing frameworks to help us get our job done. So when it says map our security policies and controls mapping and frameworks, we can use things like COSO. We can use things like COBIT for public company controls. We can do things like for ITIL for managed services and other things we're trying to implement at the IT level. With respect to self-regulations, industries will try to self-regulate for one purpose only, and that's to keep the government from stepping in and helping them regulate. So self-regulation is less costly, more flexible than having the government tell you what to do, and standards can turn into best practices and leading practices. We talked about PCI and credit card industry. We've got ITIL, which is the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. If you've not heard of managed services, you should check out ITIL. It's starting to talk about some of the things you should be doing in the managed services environment. So who are all the players here? We've got government agencies. We've got private compliance. We probably have a chief compliance officer who is overseeing all regulations. We have auditors, both internal, probably external. And we've got regulators who enforce the policies for the government. So in summary, the government is a driver for regulations. We need to align our security policies and procedures with regulations. The net result is we're probably going to get a better result, but doing it seems like a hassle at the time. If we can, we'll self-regulate because that's going to be easier than having the government step in. When we self-regulate, that's going to lead to best practices and even best industry practices. We want to know who the players are in this process, and ideally we can save time, effort, and money by leveraging an existing framework. Okay, so let's move on to Chapter 4, Business Challenges within the 7 domains of IT responsibility, which happens to correspond to the discussion threads this week. So our learning objectives is to analyze how security policies help mitigate or lessen risk and support business processes in various domains of typical IT infrastructure. Key concepts will be the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. We wanted to align security policies with business requirements. Kind of talked about that. We want to know our top business risk in each domain, what security controls we're going to put in place for each domain, and how to mitigate risk across each domain. So what are our different domains? A domain is kind of a collection of related things. So we have a user domain. We have a workstation domain, which is the PCs that are sitting on the user's desk. We have a LAN domain that they're sharing data across and sharing devices across. We have a LAN to WAN, our wide area network. That's our taking us off our local area network and get us onto the real internet. We have the WAN domain. We have a system application domain, which might have different servers, may have firewalls, may have routers, may have other devices. And then we have the broadband domain, which is our kind of our backbone of the internet. So role of security policies and procedures and domains, our user domain. How do end users access information? Period. How do they get to the printer? How do they get to the network? How do they share resources? And in our workstation domain, management and security of computing devices used by end users. general rule, if you can touch it, you can hack it. And so we have to have a good security process for our workstation domains that may not go home at the end of the day when our workers do. Our LAN domain, we want to manage network security. We want to keep intruders out. We want to have firewalls that protect things from getting in. WAN, we want to have security of the data across the wide area network. If we have a LAN to WAN bridge kind of thing going on, which is typically our router, we want to secure it. How do people remotely access our network? Are they using VPNs in our system and applications? Are we writing secure applications? Where's our data? Is it encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted in transfer or transmission? What are our rules and guidelines? Authorization, access control. Authorization says who is authorized to access the system. Sometimes that's confused with authenticated. Who's authenticated? And what can people do with a specific authorization? We talked about last week a little bit about role-based access controls, where we define or assign each user to specific roles. So we might have administrators, might have power users, might have just regular users, might have report writers. Each one gets different capabilities assigned to them that they need to perform their job. So it's easy to administer. We get the roles done correctly. Then it's just a matter of managing which users are a member of what roles, which isn't always easy in a big company because people come on board, people quit, people are fired. So we're constantly having to update this process. So you can see that we've got managers with elevated rights. We might have staff, and then we grant permissions to each one of them. And a role-based access, we're going to have the different roles, and we're going to assign the privileges and capabilities to each role as opposed to individual users. So a central management system enforces security through central management of controls and configurations. So we might have inventory management, we might have discovery software data, we might have patch management, we might have a help desk, we might have log management, we might have security management. And so all those things will be centralized. Types of LANs, we can have flat LANs with no controls, the entire network's visible. We have segmented, where the marketing group gets their own WAN, operations gets their own WAN, finance gets their own WAN. So if you get into the or a LAN, you don't necessarily get access to finance data because you're not on their LAN. So as we talk about LAN to WAN, we normally have a DMZ, and that's a server within our local area network that is exposed to the outside. Typically, it's our web server, and so it's an area that we refer to as the DMZ, and so users can have access to it without having access to the rest of our LAN. I briefly mentioned VPNs. VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. It's a way for people to remote in to our system. They use VPN software. We need a VPN server on our end that answers their responses. Then they can interact with their systems as if they're right on the process. We first installed VPNs back in the day when they were expensive and they were new technology. But what we found was it extended everybody's workday because they could get to their computers from home, log in, get to their email and things that we didn't necessarily expose outside the network. So authentication, it's how we manage users. The key thing to note today is, even though it's a pain, we should be using multi-factor authentication. So you should have to log in with your username and password and then type another control that goes to maybe your phone. So how do we connect our VPNs? We might use them for site-to-site connection, which is kind of a behind-the-scenes network between our two sites. We might use it from a remote login capability that we kind of talked about. So that'd be our site-to-site connection. We want to mitigate our risks through policy, and that's kind of our goal. And so each of the 7 IT domains have different types of risks associated with them. We can help mitigate some of those risks by defining good IT policies. Each policy must address as many risks in that domain as possible, and some policies may spread across domains. We want to identify our business risk. Remember, we have a threat, and its probability of occurrence becomes the risk. Some of the top business risks and mitigations At the user level, getting employees to comply with policies requires training, requires enforcement, might require some reward. Workstation, preventing security breaches. You can touch it, you can hack it. So technical security through controls, you can have multi-factor authentication. LAN, if you're on it, you can hack it. You start listening and you start packet monitoring. LAN to WAN, we want to make sure our DMZ is secure. The only thing they can get to is our things that we're exposing on the web server. Our WAN, we want to make sure that we have, if we have our own wide area network, and we might not. Remote access, how are we going to allow people into the network? How are we going to allow people into the network? And then how are we securing our specific applications? So with respect to the goal of mitigating data loss, it's also called data leakage or DLP protection. The goal of DLP is to prevent confidential information from leaving either accidentally or on purpose, somebody stealing it. So some of the layers of defense include inventory, what assets are connected to the network, perimeter, how are we going to guard our endpoints, our points into and out of the network, encryption, are we going to encrypt data at rest, are we going to encrypt data in transfer, what encryption mechanisms are we going to use. So we talked about the 7 different roles, the 7 domains. We talked about some business challenges and the role of risk. We want to make sure we have policies to mitigate risk across all the domains. We talked about a couple different security considerations at each domain and the rationale for making organizations driven by domains. And we talked about multi-factor authentication. I think if you guys have logged into any sites, you probably experienced it. You log in with your username and password, it then sends a text to your phone. You have to reply to it with the value sent. Multiple factors leads to better security. And that was a lot, again. But we did cover things that are going to be in the discussion thread. So, and most of the questions for the quiz will come out of the presentations as well. So have a great week, and I will see you in the threads.